Welcome everyone to the APH Virtual Excel Academy. We are so glad to have you with us today. Today is Conversations with Your General Education Teacher. We hope that you are ready to talk about what you need for virtual learning, or at least think about what you need for virtual learning. You are welcome to drop your name in the chat, say hello, where you're from. We would love to say hi. I'll continue to welcome people just as we get going. This is the APH Virtual Excel Academy. It is meant for our kids kind of probably between 4th and 6th grade, but it's a topic just about anybody in school can use. This is Conversations with Your General Education Teacher, how to talk about what you need for virtual learning. Lots of us are having virtual learning right now. Sometimes you're on, sometimes you're off, sometimes you're face-to-face, sometimes you're going back home and having school right now. Welcome again. Today, our instructor is Kayleigh Bondor. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Kayleigh. Kayleigh, it's all yours.
Hi, everybody. I am Kayleigh. I am from Memphis, Tennessee. I would love to kind of hear where everybody else is from. So if you can just drop your city or your state in the chat. I am from Memphis. Welcome, welcome. That's my kitty cat, Gerald, in the background. My apologies. He is joining us for this session. All right, we've got some folks who are from New Jersey, Florida, North Carolina, Utah. Love that. There's lots of diversity right now in the United States. And so today's session is called Conversations with Your General Education Teacher. And it's designed for those of us who are learning online at least some of the time or all of the time, right? And so we've got folks from Michigan and Georgia and different school systems and different school districts across the country have different setups right now for how education is happening during COVID-19. Here in Memphis, our cases of COVID-19 are very, very high every day, and there is lots of community spread. And so we are completely virtual. Go ahead and drop in the chat. I'd love to hear whether or not y'all are virtual. You can put a V. Whether you're hybrid, you could put an H, or whether you're in person all of the time, and you can put a P. I'm just kind of curious to see how students are learning right now. And it looks like we've got a couple of folks who are in person, and that's awesome because this session will definitely give you tools for communicating with your teachers that definitely apply to school in general, which includes in-person learning. We've got some folks who are hybrid, which is excellent. So we've got all three different learning options represented today for our session. So that makes me very, very excited. So because of this diversity in the way that teachers are teaching and in the ways that students are learning, I would love to first talk about what is vision, right? What is sight, and how can we start that conversation about vision and sight in our classrooms with our general education teachers? So I love that folks are participating in the chat. I've got one more quick question for you before I get started. But what are some words or a word that you think of when you hear the word vision or when you hear the word sight? I'm just trying to get a gauge of kind of where everybody's thinking is right now with those terms. So what do you think of when you hear the word vision or sight? Some of the things that I like to think about are seeing, right? Or viewing something. I'll give everybody just another minute here to put their ideas in. And then if not, that is so okay. I will move on to kind of that part of the conversation. So what is vision? Good, so somebody put what I can see or what somebody else sees. And that's important to know too, right? Because what I can see is not always what everybody else can see. So I like to think of vision in school as the combination of sight and then the ability to process that sight. So I love what Taylor said, that it's a spectrum, right? Vision can be many different things for many different people. So some examples of sight in a school setting could be looking at the flower petals of a rose, right? And being able to see that the petals are red or see the features of that flower. If you're looking at it through a magnifying glass, especially if you're in science class, vision, or that piece of understanding, might be knowing that with a magnifier, the image appears larger. You can see more details. You can explore it in a different way, right? So another example of the sight in the classroom could be glancing at a poster on the wall to remind yourself of some teaching and learning strategies. So seeing that poster, being able to read the words on it. The vision component of that would be using the strategies from the poster to understand or to reference when you're learning. So for example, for reading, we often use something that's called the RACE strategy. So if I see a poster and I see the acronym RACE, the vision would be able to process that and understand that that is a device for learning. So sight and vision don't always work together, right? So maybe that you are asked to find a blue shape on a math problem, but all you see are shapes that are black, right? Or maybe you're asked to count tally marks for a different math problem, but you have double vision, and so you see more of the tally marks that are there. So it's important for us to learn, especially as learners who have vision needs, when our vision and sight are kind of working together, and sometimes maybe when they're not so much. So before we look into understanding our own vision and understanding sort of how that operates within the classroom, I do want to have a moment to address one final piece about the idea of vision and sight. So sight and vision can have different meanings when they're used in regular speech. So if we have the idea that it's what somebody sees, it's a spectrum, it's a combination of what you're looking at and also what you're processing from what you're looking at, we also have to recognize that that's not the only interpretation of those words. So one of the, I've got 3 examples that I'm going to share from students who I've had in the past and students who I've had now, where specifically with our general education teachers, we've kind of run into some differences with our understanding of vision and seeing. So maybe you can see the point that your teacher is trying to make in a lesson, right? I'm sure we have all heard the idea of, I see what you're trying to say, or I see your point. But maybe you can't see it when your teacher is pointing to something on a screen using their computer mouse, right? So that idea of seeing a point could be 2 different scenarios that have come up in the classroom before with me and my students. Another one is maybe you're excited to see the teacher tomorrow for class, right? I know a lot of times we very much frequently say, I'll see you next time, or I'll see you in class tomorrow. But that seeing can be a whole lot different when you're trying to see your teacher's facial expressions on a Zoom call or on a Microsoft Teams meeting when they're really, really tiny and then that small little box, right? So that difference of seeing your teacher is another example that I've kind of encountered while working with students and teachers. And then the last one that I ran into one time was seeing evidence, right? So teachers sometimes say that we have to see or find or look for the evidence when we're trying to support our argument or support our opinion for a specific topic. But if a teacher handed you a regular print novel with really, really small font, you might not be able to see it or find it or look it up in the way that they're expecting of you. So a great way to do that would be to request it in large print or in braille. That way you can see those aspects in the way that you are learning and the way that you're kind of receiving information. And so because many people have different perspectives of what vision and sight are and how those 2 work together to help support our learning, we have ways that school systems have set up so that we can provide services to students with vision impairments. And that also makes sure that students with vision impairments receive an education that supports their needs and their learning. So if you're a person who has vision impairments and you're in a school within the United States, chances are you probably have a teacher of the visually impaired. So here in Memphis, we are just called Teachers of the Visually Impaired, and so I use the term TVI. Some of you may hear certified, TVI, CTVI, different letters and acronyms, which can be a little bit confusing sometimes. So I'm going to try to always say Teacher of the Visually Impaired, but I did want to let y'all know that if I say TVI, that's what I'm talking about. So most of us do have that teacher of the visually impaired, and part of their job is to help us as students understand our own vision and our own vision needs in the classroom. The other piece of that, though, as you know, is they also work with our general education teachers. So typically at the beginning of the year, your TVI, or teacher of the visually impaired, will talk to your general education teachers a little bit about your vision and your learning in the classroom. But as students, it's up to us to talk to our teachers as well. And so what are some of the ways that you're able to get in touch with your teacher during virtual or hybrid learning? Drop those in the chat. So take a moment to think about, obviously in person, you can walk up to your teacher and have a conversation, but what are some of the ways that we can get a hold of our teachers when we're learning either virtually or in a hybrid setting, which means virtually some of the times? Take a moment to drop those in the chat. What are some different ways that you can talk to your regular education teachers? Okay. Email's a great option. Somebody says the Remind app, good. Any others? Give everybody just a moment. Sending a message on Canvas, a phone call or a text message. All of those are excellent ideas. I had in my notes, calling or texting if you have a phone number, classroom applications such as Remind or Class Dojo, Canvas, which is another learning platform. And another one is also seeing if you can use your mute and your unmute feature or the chat box feature during class, right? So email's a great way, Remind app, sending a message. Those are great ways to get in touch with your teacher either before or after class. But when learning is actually occurring, you can also use the hand raise feature. You can use your microphone, or you can type in the chat box. I love that we all have different ways to contact our teachers, because that also means that we have different ways if one of the ways doesn't work, right? So that is really exciting to hear about the different kinds of methods that we can use to talk to our teachers. So I do want to say, before we go any further with this, I do want to remind us that disabilities and information that's contained in our individualized education program, IEP, that sort of information is confidential. My laptop's shaking a little bit because my kitty cat wants attention. I apologize. And confidential means that it's private to you. Confidential information is information that you can choose to share with people for whom it is important to know. So before you shoot off a text or a Remind app or a Canvas message, just make sure that you check in with your parent or another trusted adult to make sure that the information that you're sending is something that will be protected within one of those third-party applications. So before we talk specifically about our learning in the classroom as it relates to a virtual setting, it's important for us to have a good idea about our own vision impairments and about our own sight needs, just as they exist outside of the context of school or learning. So this is our first chance to take some notes. I'm going to give everybody about 15 seconds. grab a pencil or a pen or paper or a braille writer or a note-taking application, and we're going to take down 5 pieces of information. So when you are ready with your materials to start a new line on your note-taking device, we're going to start with a number 1. And number 1, when we write down number 1, call it my VI. So my VI. And this is simply the name of your visual condition, right? So if you have Leber's congenital amaurosis, that's what you could put down if you have glaucoma or macular degeneration. But number 1 is quite simply, we want to name what our visual condition or conditions are. So we can have multiple vision conditions that impact our learning in different ways. So number 1 is my VI, and I put a colon, and then write down what your vision condition is called. I'll give everybody a moment to do that. One of the things to be careful of here is if you use acronyms. Acronyms are excellent, and they're a great way to shorten information once everybody understands what that information is and what that information means. So if you're first time talking to your teacher about your vision condition, try to use all of the words and all of the names involved in that. So once you start a new line, once you've put number 1, my VI, and you've listed the name of your vision condition, go ahead and start a new line and put number 2. Number 2 is also just 2 words. I have. I have. And after the words I have, go ahead and put blindness or low vision, right? So typically people fall into one of 2 categories. And as we know, vision and sight are a spectrum. And so there can be people who definitely meet the criteria and kind of fit in between, but typically we know whether or not we have blindness or low vision. If you're somebody who would prefer to write I am blind or I am low vision, that is absolutely okay too. However you identify, however you would like to categorize your sight, but definitely we want teachers to know the difference between whether or not we are blind or whether or not we have low vision. So number 1 is my VI. Number 2 is I have blindness or I have low vision. I'll give everybody a moment to finish writing that down, and we can start a new line for number 3. Number 3 is either going to be I can see or I cannot see. So typically, if you are somebody who has low vision, we want to focus on some of the things that we are able to see. But if you are somebody who has blindness, the teacher needs to know that too. And so for my I can or cannot see, I usually want to write 1 to 3 sentences about my vision or about my sight throughout the day. Things that are important for my teacher to know. Because we're doing this to create a conversation that we can have with our teacher soon in the future, think about your last couple of lessons. Think about the last couple of activities or tasks or things that you have been asked to do in the classroom. Because this is an upcoming conversation with your teacher, think about the things that you can see for their specific lessons. A couple examples of this might be, I can only see blurred colors when you share your screen. Or I cannot see the notes that you write when you use a thin pencil. Or I cannot see your PowerPoint unless I have a braille display or a screen reader. So think of some of those situations, bell work, exit tickets, apps that you might use, in 1 to 3 sentences about how your vision and your sight are working right now. You may be somebody who everything is working well for them. You're able to see things, you can participate, you're not getting fatigued. And that's excellent. That's wonderful. Those are things that you can share with your teachers too. What's going well? What's working correctly? What is helping you to learn? So take a few more moments, 1 to 3 sentences for I can or I cannot see, and think of I can see when or I cannot see if. I get tired throughout the day, so my classes after lunch are really, really hard for me to look at small details. We're just kind of getting the wheels turning, thinking about how our vision works in the classroom. So that's our first 3 components, right? My VI, I have, and I can or cannot see. When you start your new line for our 4th component, number 4, I need. So in your IEP or in your individual program for your education, typically students receive some fairly standard or very commonly used accommodations and modifications in order to help them access school and learning. If you know some of those specific things that are listed in your IEP, that's awesome. But for right now, and you can list those if you want to, but if you don't, that's absolutely okay. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about. What do you need that you think about? And so this doesn't have to be what's in your IEP. These are things that we're learning and growing and discovering now and as we continue our journey for online learning. So list 1 to 3 things that you need that your teacher, especially your general education teacher, can give you. So examples of that might be, I need extra time to complete my assignments, right? One of the things that your general education teacher can do is give you an extension so that you can take your work home, so that you can work on it with better lighting or when your eyes are less strained. Another example of something you might need is your own copy of a PowerPoint or a lesson that's sent ahead of time. Oftentimes, folks who have low vision or blindness want to be able to reference the materials that the teacher is using on their own time or later, or in a format such as braille or enlarged print, or using a screen reader. And we can't really do that if we don't have access to the PowerPoint on our own, right? We can't do that if the teacher's just sharing it via their screen. It looks like Monica says that that's exactly what she does. It's very helpful to have your own copy of the PowerPoint or the notes that the teacher is using. So I love that. I love that that's something that we're already kind of doing within our classes. Another example of something you need is for your teacher to upload assignments in a specific format, right? So if you need a .docx or a .pptx, typically I found PDFs, anything that's uploaded or written or put into a PDF format, I have a hard time using a braille display or a screen reader in order to access PDF documents. So one of my big things that I try to tell teachers is send it in the original file format, whether it's a Word document or a PowerPoint or something like that. And as we know, you might need something from your teacher that is not always listed in the IEP. So those could be things like, I need to know when your office hours are so that I can talk to you after class, or I need to know if you can meet with me once a week for 15 minutes so that we can review the work and review my extended time. So this section is just some things that you can think of that you might need from your general education teacher to help support you in the classroom. Those are things that may or may not also be in the IEP. So that was number 4. I need. A couple of things that you would need from your teacher. We can start a new line for number 5. So one of my biggest things that I want to remember and remind us all of is that it is absolutely our teacher's responsibility, our school's responsibility, our bus driver's responsibility to get us to school and provide us with our learning and provide us with what we need. But we also have a lot of responsibilities, right? We also can do things that will help us learn and help us be the best students that we can be. So number 5 is I can also try. I can also try. So what are some of the things, list 1 to 3 of them for number 5, I can also try, things that you can do on your own to make sure that your needs are being met. So some examples of this might be, I could use my handheld magnifier to make my screen appear larger. I can use my CCTV when I'm working on a tablet. I can use a 5-minute break to make my eyes less tired. Or I can write down a problem that I've noticed in class to remind myself to talk to my teacher of the visually impaired later on. So number 5 is some of the things that I can try on my own independently that I may not need a general education teacher or a TVI or anybody else to support me in accessing my learning. Excellent. So we've got our VI listed. We've listed whether or not we have low vision or blindness. We've listed what we can or cannot see that we've kind of noticed for our past couple of lessons, learning either virtually or hybrid or in person. Number 4, we listed what we need from our general education teachers in the classroom setting. And last but not least, we have number 5, so I can also try. Those are tools that you can use and skills that you have learned so that you can be more independent and in charge of your own learning. So keeping all of those pieces in mind, there are lots of different tools that teachers are currently using for online learning. So this is kind of the segue in the piece that we're getting into now, where we're actually talking about the specifics of our new and improved, possibly, learning methods for learning in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. So there's lots of different tools we can use, and those tools can include things like applications, right? Those are applications that you download from some sort of virtual store onto your cell phone or your tablet or your desktop or laptop computer. There's also things like softwares, right? Those are programs or websites or tools that we can visit and access that we don't have downloaded anywhere onto our computer. Softwares are typically things that we can run and access via internet connection. There are hardwares that teachers can use. So those might be some of the programs that you have on your school computer, things like Microsoft Word, things that can be downloaded. And then also websites, right? Websites like YouTube or Nearpod. So drop in the chat the name of 1 or 2 virtual learning tools that your teacher uses. Even if you're a person who is learning in person, I have a feeling that we all go on the computer sometimes during school. So this is a great opportunity for those folks who are completely in person to let me know what are some of the online or virtual or computer-based tools that you're using at your schools. Go ahead and drop those in the chat. Give everybody a minute to type in their answer. What are some of the things that you're using with your teachers? Some of the things that I've been using, so there's virtual school platform. I love that. So we access our virtual school platform through something called Canvas, which is just wild because I have been learning so many new names and terms and companies and websites this year. So virtual school platform is a great one that lots of school districts use. I've also seen things such as Microsoft Teams or Zoom, right? Kahoot. Kahoot is a great interactive sort of quiz game type that is used on people's cell phones or computers. There's Nearpod, iReady, IXL, Mastery Connect, Google, YouTube, all kinds of options that are available for learning in an online format. So as we know, a lot of these tools are very, very visually based. Typically, they require a lot of input from sight or vision in order to be used fully. But there are a couple of different ways that these technologies and these tools and these things that teachers use can be made more accessible to folks who have vision needs. So some of the ways that these tools can be made accessible would be the option of text to speech or braille output. So for example, you might use JAWS if you have downloaded that application. And that can be used throughout your computer programs. That can be used for websites as well as for working within the computer desktop itself. You might also have immersive reader. So Zach says his virtual school platform, the pages have a speaker button so that the words speak. That's excellent. That is kind of the system that I have seen that how immersive reader works. There's also things like Microsoft Narrator, Apple VoiceOver, any kind of read aloud or text to speech software that would allow you to also put a braille display on it, is a way that websites can be made accessible. Using an iPad with VoiceOver, yes, all of those are options for how we can engage with websites without necessarily using our vision or our sight fully. A lot of times websites and applications will use alternative text or image descriptions for visual materials, right? So if there's a comic panel that you're trying to learn in English class, for example, if a website is accessible, it will have a description of each comic panel, as well as any salient information. So any words that the characters are saying, anything that's really important in the background or the environment. But it can also be something as simple as doing a math problem about apples and oranges. And the alternative image text described says that there are 5 orange apples and 5 red apples and 6 orange oranges, right? Something very simple like that. And then another major way that these websites and these virtual learning tools can be made accessible is the accessibility features. Go ahead and drop in the chat, what are some of the customizable accessibility features that we can change on websites or computers or cell phones? What are some of the things that we can do and some of the settings that we can play with in order to make it easier to see or to interact with without sight, right? So Monica says she uses the immersive reader, which is excellent. When I think of accessibility features, 2 of the things that I think of off of the top of my head are text size. I can zoom in or zoom out on my computer screen, making my screen bigger, enlarging it, zooming in on everything that's on the screen. You can also typically invert colors, right? So you can make your text white on a black background. You can change the font typically. If a font has very, very, curly cues and lots of very elaborate sort of decorations and making the letters, you might be able to change it to a simpler font that's cleaner and easier to see. So yes, so we've got actual programs and softwares and hardwares such as VoiceOver, immersive reader, speak buttons. And then we've also got the way that we can change the visual way that the information looks. We can change colors, we can change sizes, we can zoom in and out. Awesome. So as we know, these tools are not always accessible in the ways that they should be, right? Sometimes your teacher might upload your materials in a PDF format and your screen reader is not compatible with a PDF document. Oh, it looks like Cami likes Google text to speech for talkback texting. Yes, I love my talkback Google keyboard. I also love my brailleback Google keyboard. So when I connect my braille display to my cell phone, I change my input method to brailleback, which is kind of the same as talkback or the same as, just the regular keyboard. And sometimes that doesn't work, right? Sometimes there are barriers and obstacles that we can come across, even when we're trying to make our lives easier and we're trying to access information. So sometimes the default size and text and color of a website is not able to be changed, right? You don't have the choice to make it more accessible. Sometimes there'll be things that are too small or too lightly colored, and sometimes there'll be images that don't have a description. I know that one of the most frustrating asks for my students who are blind is when a question asks them to describe a picture and it doesn't have any sort of description of the picture at all with which they can work with. So those are some of the really common sort of problems and obstacles that we might encounter when we're using online tools. So when we have discovered that an accessibility feature within a program is not working, that it's not accessible, that you aren't able to access it in the way that you need to be able to learn, there are 3 steps that we can take. Step number 1 is simply make sure that there's no way around it, right? So even if the website doesn't have a zoom in feature, can you pinch your screen? Can you use your desktop? Can you use your mouse to zoom in and out just based on the application or website alone? Can you get a sighted buddy who can help you read aloud a test or an assignment? Obviously, once you discover that something's not able to be read in the way that you need it to, you can talk to your teacher, but sometimes your assignments still due within a couple of hours. And so in order to complete it, you may need to ask for assistance 1 or 2 times until a more long-term solution is found. The second step, once you've made sure that there's a way around it, if you have found that there is not a way around it in which you are not able to independently complete your work every single time, the second step is to tell your teacher immediately that you're having trouble accessing a lesson. This is a great way to use those 1 or 2 sentences, keep it nice and clear and concise, and just explain what the trouble is. For example, it might be that iReady does not provide read aloud on all of the questions. Only some of the iReady questions have read aloud. That might be, I wasn't able to access the assignment in Teams because it was in PDF instead of a Google Doc, right? So just 1 or 2 quick sentences that describe what the accessibility problem is. There's lots of pictures on the website and I can't see them and I can't answer questions about them in this way, right? These are not, I give up, throwing my hands up type situations, but we're trying to find solutions to make sure we can access our learning in the way that we need to. So number 1, once you've made sure there's no way around it. Number 2, you've decided that you're going to have a conversation and let your general education teacher know as soon as you are able. Number 3 is you can actually inform the app or the software or the website or whatever it is themselves that you're having an issue accessing it. So a lot of people don't know this, but websites and anything that you can access via the internet, the World Wide Web, are listed as public domain, which means they have to follow some rules with being a public space. Specifically, those accessibility rules would be any visitor, including those who have low vision or blindness, should be able to navigate, read, search, and otherwise find and explore information on that website just the same way as a person with sight could. So they're held to those same rules, and it's kind of like this. If there's a website that exists that doesn't have accessibility features and that you're not able to access as a person with vision impairments, that's kind of a similar situation to if you went to the library and couldn't get to the 2nd floor because there wasn't a wheelchair ramp or an elevator. So just like any physical building, like school buildings and doctors' offices and apartments have to be designed so that people with disabilities can access them fully, the same applies to these websites and these apps and these softwares and all of these tools that our teachers are using. Typically, those websites will have some sort of spot that says contact us or contact information. Usually it's as simple as sending an email. Sometimes it might be a telephone number, sometimes they have text hotlines. But what you want to do is simply say, I am a person with a visual impairment and I am not able to use your services. And it is my right to be able to use services with your website. So what are some of the things that you're working on for accessibility? It would be really powerful if you could even share with them a couple of examples. For example, the text on your headings is too small, giving an option to make it larger. The colors are really not well contrasting. And so everything kind of blends into itself. There's too many pictures. It's distracting. There's not enough. The pictures listed don't have alternative text descriptions. So when you encounter problems with accessibility, not only do you want to tell your teacher, but go ahead and let the company or the website or the tool know as well. Because it's very important for them to receive feedback from people who are using it. And they oftentimes just don't know until somebody tells them. So the moral of that is, even though people sometimes maybe should know or have been told, as a person who has to access this information, sometimes it is our responsibility to start those conversations with folks, which is wonderful. It's a great way to learn on both sides of that conversation. So we did say that step 2 was informing your teacher immediately if there's an issue. And then step 3 is informing that company. But in order to complete step 2, let's explore a couple of tips for talking with your general education teachers. So we've kind of done an overview of what is vision and sight, what is vision and sight as it relates to online learning and these hybrid tools that we're using sometimes. What are the steps that we can take to kind of explain that information? And then this is part number 4, where we kind of put it all together in this sort of neat little basket of how can we have conversations with our general education teachers about some of these very new and exciting and innovative issues that sometimes come up. So my first piece of advice is make sure that it's an appropriate time, right? You don't want to be going to your teacher in the middle of a pop quiz or in the middle of bell work when they're trying to instruct other students and have a split focus. You are a very important and integral part of a teacher's classroom, but sometimes when you want specific individualized attention, you have to make sure that it's a good time to receive that attention. So one of the most simple things to ask is, hey teacher, I'd love to talk to you. When is a good time? And then being open to that, right? So sometimes when you have to schedule a conversation with somebody, they might say, oh, after 3 o'clock. But what if you have an appointment at 3? Then it's your responsibility to continue that dialogue and say, 3 o'clock doesn't work, but what about 4? Or what about the next day? Are you free then? So just making sure that it's a good time to talk to your teacher, and that can simply be, hey, when's a good time to chat? The second piece is always thank your teacher for meeting with you, or thank them for reading your email or reading your text or listening to your voicemail message, and for helping you be the best student that you can be. So sometimes when I talk to my teachers, it might be because I'm frustrated or I don't understand or I wasn't able to access the assignment last night. And that's all valid and that's all really okay. But we also want to make sure that we're not kind of throwing all of those emotions onto our teacher, especially when we're trying to get them to help us. So it's always really good to just very quickly say, hey teacher, I'd love to talk to you soon. Thank you for being willing to talk or meet with me or read my text message. I appreciate it, right? We love that. The third piece is to clearly explain your current visual needs, right? So typically when we're talking to our teachers, maybe, I guess for me, this is a total me thing, but when I'm talking to my teacher, it's usually because I've got a problem or a struggle or something's not working for me. And so I want to be able to explain that very clearly. This is where we can use some examples from our earlier parts of the lesson, where I say, hey teacher, iReady won't read aloud every piece, or immersive reader won't turn on, or I'm having troubles reading your PDFs that you are uploading because my screen reader will not access them. But just very clearly and specifically explain some of the issues, or not even issues. Maybe you're talking to your teacher to check in and you're saying, hey, thank you so much for using a thicker pencil. I'm able to see the math examples a lot better now. Or it really worked for me when you allowed me to turn in my assignment via Teams instead of trying to turn it in using Nearpod. Or, I finally learned the keyboard commands for Zoom. So now I'm able to mute and unmute independently. So please call on me in class, right? We can talk to our teachers for things that are both positive and beneficial, and also those things that are barriers. But we want to make sure that we're talking to them either way so that we can keep that communication going. So we must first explain those problems so that our teachers can understand the solutions, right? So that's why we're clearly explaining sort of what's going on. The next part is make sure that your teacher is following your accommodations and modifications. So this is definitely a part of a conversation, right? This is a check-in. So both you and your teacher can discuss your ideas. As we know, not every accommodation or modification that's listed in our individual education program is necessary for every piece, right? So one of my most common accommodations that my students receive is preferential seating, where they can choose to move closer to the point of instruction. With online learning, though, that might not be an accommodation that comes up as much because we're not necessarily having to move closer to our teacher when our teacher's teaching from their house and we're learning from our bedroom, right? So make sure that your teacher sort of knows what your accommodations are and that they're following them, because teachers are people too. Sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes they don't realize that an accommodation might apply in that situation. But it's really, really important to make sure that your IEP is being followed first and foremost. So once you do that, once you make sure that those accommodations and modifications are being followed, that might fix all of your visual barriers, but it also might not. So the next thing you can do is ask your teacher if there are alternative or other ways that you can meet the same requirements as your classmates, but maybe a little bit differently. So for example, maybe the Remind app does not work very well for you when trying to reach out to your teacher with questions about homework. So using the school email might be an example of completing the same task, just a little bit differently. Maybe Class Dojo is really, really hard for you to upload an image of the work that you did, but using Microsoft Teams within the assignment is easier and more accessible. Talk to your teacher, see what ideas or options they might have. And you might find that you're also finding solutions for other students who maybe don't have vision impairments, but for whatever reason, the app that's not working with you is also not working for them for a totally different reason, right? So this is a dialogue that's exploring the ways that we can participate virtually and online, because this is new for most of us. And that's really exciting because we can have conversations and learn and grow and discover in ways that we never probably would have been able to before. Because I think this is true for me and my students. COVID-19 and virtual learning has made us learn a lot more technology skills a lot more quickly than we normally would have. So it's a great opportunity to learn about what works and what doesn't. And as we know, sometimes apps and programs change, right? They get updates. They listen to feedback from users. They try to add more accessibility features. So just because something isn't working right now in December, it might be totally revamped and doing great by February. So that's why we want to also stress continuous conversations regularly, because our vision needs change as we change and as we grow. And so that's a piece, right? Ask if there are other ways that you can have the same requirements met in a way that might be a little more accessible to you. Another great piece is asking your teacher if there are questions that you should ask your teacher of the visually impaired. So what do I mean by that? Sometimes we may discover a problem or a barrier or an obstacle that both our general education teacher and us realize we need a little more support in, but we don't know where to go from there. So that might be a great chance to get in the habit of talking to your TVI and asking them for solutions sometimes. And sometimes our TVIs can be a great resource to kind of discover and recognize other aspects of our learning that maybe our teacher or our gen ed teachers and I haven't figured out or haven't seen in that way. So always ask your teacher if there's other things that you can get from your TVI, because sometimes teachers just need a little more information, especially if you're the first student with a vision impairment with whom they've worked. Congratulations, that's awesome. What a great experience for both of you. But it doesn't hurt to seek support and advice from another adult too. And then the last little piece to keep in mind, communicate as needed with your teachers, right? So that can be very frequently, but at least once every 2 weeks. We always want to check in at least twice a month to make sure that we're receiving our materials in the correct format, to make sure that we're not getting marked late for turning in assignments when we have extended time, to make sure that we're paying attention to the updates on the app and we've realized that the unmute icon has changed locations, right? So contact your teachers pretty regularly. I know that your TVI is also communicating with them and letting them know when IEP meetings happen and when things like that change. But it's also good to keep in contact with your teachers just as a student yourself. Sometimes they might forget to send you your notes in advance. Sometimes they'll be in the middle of class and they're asking you to read aloud on their screen share that's, 2 centimeters tall, right? Try to keep your communication factual and clear, right? We don't want little problems where they're always calling on you or they're always getting on you for turning in your assignments late to kind of build up into bigger problems. And just hold a lot of grace for everybody right now. So we're all learning a lot of new skills and we're trying to apply those new skills in a lot of new environments and in different ways. And so remembering that even if your teacher does make a mistake and even if they forget to do something or they call on you to do something that's hard to see, just clearly say that, very respectfully remind them and see where that takes you, right? The idea of having a conversation and a dialogue is where everybody is feeling supported and feeling like they're able to solve any problems that might happen or might come up. So, excellent. I really have talked for almost an hour, which is great. I love talking about this stuff, y'all. So thank you for being here with me. Just to provide a quick little overview and recap of what we talked about today. We first discussed what are vision and sight. We talked about the information, the 5 pieces of information that you want to include when you're talking to your general education teachers about your vision impairment and about your learning. We talked about accessibility and learning needs in a hybrid or virtual setting, right? We talked about some of the different programs and some of the things that can help us use those programs and some of the things that make it harder for us to use those programs. And we talked about what actions we can take when learning materials are not accessible. We can try some solutions on our own. We can reach out to our general education teachers. We can reach out to the companies themselves. And then we talked a little bit about how specifically we can reach out to our general education teachers to have the most productive conversation that we can. So those are things like making sure you catch them at a good time, making sure that we're being polite and open to receiving feedback, and also making sure that we're able to clearly communicate our visual needs within a classroom setting. And sometimes that might look like, I don't really know what the solution is. I'd love to hear your opinion, but here are my current barriers or my current issues. Let's have a conversation. And so now it is currently 1:55. We have 5 more minutes. I would love to open it up to the chat to see if anybody has any questions, any anxieties. I think you can raise your hand and they will call on you, or you can type your question in the chat.
Both ways work.
Yes. And these are just any questions or feedback or anxieties, anything you want to know kind of about how to reach out to your general education teachers. One of the things that I kind of get a little bit anxious about is making phone calls. And it seems like Zach says that he also gets nervous when making phone calls. That's a really, really valid anxiety. And one of the ways that you can overcome that is make sure that you have what you want to say, right? So sometimes I get anxious if I don't have a social script or I don't have it in my head, kind of where I want to go with my conversation. But I find that if I've written it out, if I've got a piece of paper next to me, or if I've typed it up on my cell phone note, having 2 or 3 things that I know that I want to get into that conversation can help me feel less nervous. Monica said that she's nervous if she's not prepared, right? So trying to make sure that you are preparing in advance in the way that you want to formulate your thoughts and also have an idea of what you want the outcome to be, right? Sometimes I get nervous if I haven't decided why I'm doing what I'm doing. So maybe your outcome is you want to learn a little bit more about how your teacher is teaching, you want to use a different app, but have an idea in your head sort of where you would like for that conversation to go before starting it, would be my recommendation. And also recognize that it's okay to be nervous. One of my favorite things to do when I'm on the phone with somebody is say, hey, I'm really anxious right now, but I'm trying to get through it. I think that people will very much appreciate you sharing your feelings and your emotions because it's scary to talk to adults. It's scary to talk to people. And so I think people would definitely appreciate that nervousness for sure. Any other questions? I know that we're kind of a little bit ahead. I rushed through a little bit. My apologies.
You are just fine. And so what I'll do is I will say thank you so much, Kayleigh. This has been fabulous. Great to have you again visiting us at the Academy. Tomorrow is storytelling through music, really aimed at our high school students, but of course, everybody is welcome.
Thank you so, so much.
Thank you, Kayleigh. That was such a great lesson. It was really informative. I really liked how you organized everything. So thank you for such a great lesson.